Okay, so we are back for our second session where we are talking about for loops for the next 45-ish minutes, 55 minutes. And okay, for loops and iterative loops is something you are going to use all of the time. This is something that will be used often. So we're going to break it down super simple and we're going to get to a point where we can really understand this stuff. I just want to point out that if this does not come super duper easy to you at the beginning, that's very okay. When I first learned how to do for loops, I had no idea what was going on. I really struggled. So if you find yourself that at the beginning, there's some videos. This video is a great one to kind of walk it through. If you find yourself feeling like you're struggling, that's very okay. That is a-okay. Please, if you can, ask questions in this next 50 minutes, because this is something that is important. But again, this sounds so stupid and I hated when people said it, but this is where practice will make it easier. And Paul can attest to this. Right off the bat, you might be like, oh, yuck. Or it might make sense here. And then you go and you're like, what the heck? Once you practice this, you'll be able to do it in your sleep. I promise that. Okay. So oftentimes within coding, we want our computer to do something over and over and over again. Maybe we want it to check through a whole bunch of numbers, or we want it to do something repetitive. And if we wanted to do something repetitive, instead of having it do something like this, where I want to console log 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That kind of doesn't make sense. And so, you can do that, but your lines of code is going to be really long, right? And we want to make sure that we have dry code, which is do not repeat yourself. It is efficient code. And so what we can use is something called a loop, right? Because what that'll allow us to do is have our computer do kind of the heavy lifting of doing something over and over and over and over again. And we kind of just write it one time and the computer does the big lift for us. So there's a couple different variations of loops. The one we're going to talk about really is a for loop. Now, when we get into web fundamentals, I think we're going to talk about a while loop. But for right now, all you need to do is a for loop. That is it. So let's talk about for loops in JavaScript. And again, for loops in these iterations are something you're going to use in any language. And so these are really some foundational pieces. It might look different in Python and it might look different in Java or C#, but the same idea is transferable to any sort of language. You just have to figure out how do they write it that way, and then we are good to go. So if we're looking at the platform here, in the same way, when we're declaring and telling our computer, hey, be ready, I'm going to have a conditional statement with the keyword of if, we can tell our computer, hey, I've got a keyword of for, meaning, hey, I need you to repeat some information for me. So we type the word for. Now, after we type for, we have our parentheses, right? And we have 3 different things that we need to put in. So for the first one, I will create a variable. Oftentimes it's going to be I is what you use. You can use anything. It could be unicorn, it could be cupcake. It doesn't matter. You might see it as I often. I don't know why, like maybe for iteration. But we're going to declare a variable. Now, I know that we've talked about with ECMAScript, you don't need to have the semicolons frequently. Within a for loop, you do, right? You have to have the semicolon because it has to declare this is where this part is stopping. So this is what, so I'm going to write it here for a second. Let's say that we want to console.log all numbers 0 through 10. Perfect. So what I need to do is I'm telling my for loop, okay, I need you to do something over and over. And for this this is where you're going to start. You're going to start at the 0, right? Because we're doing numbers 0 to 10. So this is, you can think about this top part as our, let's see if I can. Perfect. That'll be our start. Then we're going to have our stop. So when do we want it to stop? Well, we want it to go all the way through 10. So we're going to say we're going to give it a condition is less than 11. Now you might say, well, I thought we were going to 10. Well, if we say I is less than 10, then what we're going to do is we're going to stop at 10 because 10 is not less than 10. And then we won't include that in there. And then the last thing we're going to do is say I plus plus. Okay. Then all we're going to go in here, and I'm going to break this down, so do not worry, is we want to console log I. What on earth? Lucas, I just explained why we're not going to stop at 10. It's because if we stop at 10, then it's not going to read the number 10, and that's what we're wanting. So you do need to go 1 over. And we're going to start here in a second. I'll tell you, I'll explain here in just a second if this is not making sense. Okay. Our for loop has 3 basic components to it. Where you're going to start, when do I stop, and what it's called step, but how frequently do you want me to increase my value? So what this is saying is we've got, let me get my handy dandy T. This is what we call a T diagram. It's where we can, I've got a variable, so I'm going to say var just for variable, and then val for value. And so what we're doing is we're creating a variable of I, and that's equal to 0, right? So we have this variable of I, and its value is 0. So the way the for loop is going to work is it declares this declaration only happens at the very beginning, and then it doesn't happen again. It declares this, we create this variable of I, and it's equal to 0, so its value is 0. Then what the for loop does is it comes here and says, is I less than 11? Right? Is I less than 11? And then it's gonna give us a Boolean, right? It's either gonna say true or false, right? And in this case, I is currently 0. So is that true? It is. Okay. I is less than 11. 0 is less than 11. So it enters into my for loop, and it does whatever is within my curly brackets here. Let me kind of clean this up a little bit for you guys. So it enters in and it does that. So then what we can expect it to do, and I'm going to put console right here. So it's going to console log I's value is 0. So it's going to console log 0. Then once it's done doing everything within my curly brackets, it comes up to my step and it says, how much do I increment by? This is what we call, this is us incrementing. I plus plus is the same thing as saying I equals I plus 1. It's just a shorthand version of saying it. So what you're saying is, hey, just increase the value of I by 1 with I plus plus. You can't say I plus 2 if you wanted to add in multiple steps, and you would say something like this. But you would just change it to, 2 or whatever. But most of the time, you want to do I plus plus because most of the time you're going to iterate through the entire array. Again, if this isn't making sense, give it just a second and we'll get there. So it goes to I plus plus, and so it increments. So now I's value is no longer 0, but now it's 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. Now remember, this is only read at the beginning. So now we're no longer checking that. Now we're just here, and it's going to say, is I less than 11? Well, 1 is less than 11. That's true. It enters in, it console logs. That's in console log 1. Then it goes to I plus plus. It is no longer 1. It's now 2. Then it's going to check here and you can see this is where the repetitive comes in. It says, okay, is 2 less than 11? It is. So it enters in at console logs. So we'll get 2. I plus plus. So now it's no longer 2, but 3. Is 3 less than 11? It is. Console logs 3. And it does that, so on and so forth, all the way up to when we get to, let's say that we got to 9. Right? So let's say we've done 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now we're at 9. So let's kind of walk through what's going on here. When I'm at 9, it's going to say is 9 less than 11. It is. So console logs 9. I plus plus 9 becomes 10. And then it's going to say is 10 less than 11. Yes, it is. So it's going to console log 10. Then it's going to do I plus plus. So I is going to become 11. Now on your exam, that might be a little trick question. If at the end it wants to know what I is, at the end of this, I is 11, and then we do our comparison. Is 11 less than 11? It's not, right? So now this condition's been broken and we exit our for loop and go on to the next line of code. So again, just as a walkthrough, our code, our for loop consists of a start. This is only declared at the beginning. And then once it's declared, it's not used again. We have a condition on when it stops. And then we have a way of how we're going to increment or decrement. If we wanted to go down, we could do that too. Then what it does is it checks this condition. And as long as this equates to true, we enter into our for loop. So whatever's between these two curly brackets, and we do it. So in this case, we console log I. Okay. So let's pretend that we want to. So I want to console.log all numbers 12 through 16. Can anybody tell me how I would start? What is the first thing I would do if I wanted to accomplish this? Feel free to come off mute if needed to.
4
4, yeah, exactly.
parentheses or space parentheses.
Yeah, I think either one. Yeah. And then what would I do, Lucas?
Let I
Yeah.
equals 12.
Yep.
No,
Perfect.
semicolon.
Semicolon. Perfect.
I
Uh-huh.
Less than 17.
Yeah, great call.
Space 17, I guess.
Yeah, you can. It'll evaluate it, but yeah, you could do that.
And then I plus plus.
Okay. Perfect. Now what's next? Anybody else? Great job, Lucas.
Squigglies,
Yep. Curly boys.
and then console.log. I.
Perfect. Great job. So exactly, that's exactly what we're going to do. You are going to say 4. We are declaring where we're starting, which we said 12. Declaring where we're ending, and Lucas had the foresight to remember that if we wanted to include 16, we got to go 1 up, right? Then we are incrementing by 1 because we want to make sure that we're getting every single number. So then we console log, and then Thomas came in and hit us with the console log. So if I run this, we get 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Great job. Great job. Okay. So any questions on this? I want to do maybe another one just to make sure you guys are really getting it. Any questions on this so far?
Russell did ask in chat, if you do less than or equal to 16 instead of less than 17.
Let's try it. The best way, friends, is if you're coding along, just try stuff. Let's try that. You run it? Yep, that will work. So you could do that as well. This is probably a little bit better of a way to do it.
Could we do some with where we take away, use the subtraction?
Yep, that's what I was just about to do. Cool. So let's say we want to console log all numbers in reverse. So let's do 48 to let's say 37. Okay. Can you still start with 0 in the last example? Okay, so somebody asked, could you still start with 0 in the last example? So if I started with 0, it's going to give me all the numbers from 0 to 16, right? So we want to, because this is just asking for 12 to 16, we only want to start with 12. If we did 0, it's going to get us all those numbers. Okay. Anybody want to take a crack at this? On how we could do this, maybe?
So for
4.
bracket, let I equals to 37.
If I
No,
want to do
sorry,
it in
48.
reverse, I want to do it from 48 down to 37.
So 48,
Cool, perfect.
and then I. Let's see. So that would be greater than, greater than or equal.
Yeah,
If we're the new way we're doing it. 37.
37. Yep.
And then so this part will it be I minus minus?
Yeah, great job. So if I'm wanting to increase by 1, I do I plus plus, and then the inverse of that, if I want to decrease by 1, is just I minus minus. Great catch. Okay, and then I think we all know, I just console log, dot log, I, just like we did the last one. So if I run this, I get 48 through 37. Great job, guys. So somebody said, is it not greater than 36? You could do either, right? So greater than 36 or greater than or equal to 37, you could do either one. Great job for all of those in chat that had it. Okay. Now this makes sense. We love this. We don't just have to do this for numbers. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but stay with me here. So let's say I have this array and it is Will, Paul, Gray. RIP. Grades was a TA with us last time. Well, I know that I can iterate through some numbers, right? All right, we just showed that. So what part of my array has some numbers? If I'm dealing with an array, what part of that has to do with numbers?
The length of it?
The length of it is definitely one of them. And I see also the second one is our index, right? So remembering that our index is 0, 1, and 2. So if I wanted to iterate through this array, and let's say I just wanted to see every name in this array, what I can do is I can say 4. And anybody have a guess here?
My array?
Not my array yet. Remember, we're just using the numbers of the array. And our numbers are 0, 1, and 2. So what could I start this at?
I equals
0.
1 or 0.
0, exactly, right? So I can say let I equals 0. Now, when am I gonna stop?
I is less than 3.
Less than f-
3, exactly. Way to go, Jacob. So I say I, it's less than 3. And then I'm gonna increment. I wanna read every single name, so I'm going to do plus plus. Perfect. And then I'm just going to, now, this is the challenge. I've got access to the numbers of 0, 1, and 2. How do I utilize that to target and console log each name here?
Something with my array dot index or something. I'm not really sure, but
Not dot index, but really close, Thomas. What else do we do? Yeah, Reba Ann has it in chat. You were right on there, Thomas. I'm gonna console log my array. And then remember, I can put in the index position of my array and it will bring back that value. What is keeping track? I don't want to put 1, 2, or 3 or 0, 1, 2 here, but what variable do I have that's keeping track of my 0, my 1, and my 2?
I.
Exactly. Great job. So I can just say I. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to iterate, and then we're going to read, okay, we have this array. I equals 0. Perfect. I is less than 3, I plus plus. It's going to check and say, is 0 greater than or less than 3? It is, right? So it's going to enter in. And then it's going to say, okay, I want to console log my array and the value at position of I, which in this case is 0. So really what it's saying is console log my array of 0. So then it'll console log will. Then we increment up. I becomes 1. It'll say is 1 less than 3? It is. So then we say my array of 1, which is going to be Paul, and it'll console log that. We'll increment up one more time and we'll get gray that way. So if I run this, I get Will, Paul, and gray because I'm using my index position. And I'm being creative here to grab each value within my array. Are there any questions on that? Yeah, exactly, Paul. Tell me that's not cool. Somebody says, what happens if you don't know your exact stop point? Elena, yes. This is hard coded, right? But what if down the line, I create this and then later on, I say, well, my array dot push Elena. Well, now if I run this, I don't get that, right? Because this is hard coded at 3 and this has changed. Okay, this is some big brain action. What is a way that we can keep track of how many items are in here?
Length.
Exactly, dot length, right? So if I said my array dot length, what this will do, oh, it's fun. What this will do is instead of just hard coding 3, my array dot length will go and say how many values do we need? Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. Say how many values are currently in here? And there's 4, right? Will, Paul, Gray, and then Elena. And so that my array dot length is going to give me the number of 4. So that's like I am saying I is less than 4. Now remember, and we talked about it last time, we get a little bit lucky because the length is how many items are in there. But if we pretend that Elena's in here, what index position, if she gets put right here, what index position is she at? 3, right? We got 0, 1, 2, 3. So anytime we do dot length, we're kind of doing that extra one, right? We're making sure, because even the last one is at position 3. So anytime we do dot length, we know that we're going to get everything within my array. So somebody said, is it better to use dot length than a number? If you, yes, I mean, transparently, yes, because what it does is this allows our code to be called dynamic, right? So if the array ever changes, this becomes reusable. Doesn't matter if I pop or I push 100 different things, I can still use this and get every single value, right? If my array changes over time, this for loop still works. If I had this again at 3, then this is just hard coded. And this for loop only works when there's 3. And the minute I add one or delete one, it doesn't work anymore. And so by doing this, it allows us to basically it doesn't matter whatever our array changes to or adds or deletes or whatever, doesn't matter. It will stay and we will make sure we get everything within here. So now if I run this, we should get all 4 names. Perfect. Okay. Any questions? We're about halfway through the for loops. Any questions? Just put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense, or out of a scale of 1 to 10 even, let's do this. I know a lot of you guys already put 1s, but scale of 1 to 10, how much is this making sense? And if you're anything below like an 8, that's very okay. It's very, very, very okay. This is just a practice thing. Somebody asked me to elaborate on push. I talked about it at the beginning of class and I talked about it in the office hour. So I'm not going to elaborate because there's some other things I want to talk about. But you can watch the lecture at the beginning of class and then our office hour, the very beginning part of that we talked about. So unfortunately, we got a couple other things I want to talk about. Cool. If we have time at the end, say, then I can definitely help you. Okay. Yeah, it's a great way to think about it, Tracy. Tracy said that they look like push, like they're pushing something into an array or into line and then pop like you're popping a balloon and removing something. Exactly. You got a whole bunch of balloons and you're taking one away. Great call. Okay. Now this is where the fun comes in. We can elaborate. Oftentimes you're not going to just console log. For right now, let's say, okay. But let's say I wanted to have a condition that I wanted to go through a list of names, i.e. my array. And if I see the name Paul, I want to console log, woohoo, you're amazing, best TA ever. How would I do that? How would I do that?
You
Yeah,
have
exactly.
to use if,
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
so like, if parentheses. Not exactly sure. I just started talking.
No, you're good. No, it's a great idea. So we've got this for loop that we know we're going to iterate through. So let's think about it. We've got some access to some stuff, right? We can grab everything and I don't have to just have a console log in here. Like you said, I can add in an if. So once I add in an if, what do I then have to do? What goes in the parentheses here? Do you remember? Anybody remember? Remember what it's called? What kind of name is this? A condition. Yeah, exactly. These are conditionals, right? So I put my condition. So what I want to check is if something is equal to Paul. Now, what is that something I'm comparing?
My array. Um. Square bracket.
Yeah.
1.
Maybe not one, because that's always, if we do one, that's always just going to check for, that's going to give me Paul, but I might not know it, right? I might not
Would
know.
be
Paul's
I?
at this Position.
I.
Yeah, it'd be I,
Aye.
right? I. So I can say if my array of I is equal to Paul, then I want to do something. I want to console log. What? Yeah, let's do that. Cool. So I've got my for loop. And within my for loop, I'm iterating through. And let's do our T diagram just to make sure that you guys know, because the T diagram does help once you get to a point. I promise you don't need it, but for just understanding, I think it's a really big thing to understand. Okay. So we've got I is equal to 0. That's what we've declared here. This my array, so I'm just gonna do MA dot length. Oof, sorry, is 4. Right? And so then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I is declared a 0. If I is less than 4, okay, cool. We jump in and we say, hey, if my array of 0 equals Paul, and it's going to check this and say, is that equal to Paul? Well, it's not, right? So it does not enter in console log best TA ever. Comes up here. It does I++, I becomes 1. Is 1 less than 4? It is. So we enter in and we say, okay, is my array of 1 equal to Paul? It is. So we enter into my for loop or my if statement. We console log best TA ever. And then we go on. And it's still, even though this condition's been met, my for loop condition has not been, right? So even though there's nothing else to do, my for loop is still going to say, okay, that's happened. I've console logged best TA ever. And then I want to, it'll go to I++. So I will become 2. And it'll say, is this one 2? Or sorry, is this one Paul? It's going to say no. It's going to go I++. I becomes 3. It's going to say, is Elena? No. I++. I becomes 4. And then 4 is not less than 4 here. So then it exits my for loop. Any questions on that?
So like you have the if inside the for loop and you could go on to like else if, else and everything underneath that as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So let's see. We get best TA ever. But yeah, you could do that. You could have, and then not to like totally blow your brains out, but you could say for let J equal 0. J is less than 2. J plus plus. Okay. I just want this to go away. It's wanting me to use for of, but I don't need to, but it's annoying the heck out of me. Oi. Okay. So what this will happen, let's think about this. I'm gonna put 4 right now because I'm losing my mind with this curly bracket and I don't want it to confuse you guys. Okay. That didn't do anything. What would happen here? Let's kind of T diagram this and see what the heck would happen if we did this. Oh, thank goodness. Okay. So let's walk through it. We've got our var and our value. And then we say, okay, somebody walk me through this first part. What's the first variable we're going to have? Starting from line 18 to 28. Not I yet, Corey. Close, but we're gonna have my array, right? So we're gonna have my array. And it's gonna say all these names. So I'm just gonna put ... from names, but it's gonna have all these names, right? Then, just like you said, Corey, we enter our for loop and we have this I. So we say, okay, I is equal to 0. And then we check, is I less than 4? Yes, it is. Okay, so we enter in and then we say if my array of I, which is 0, is equal to Paul. Well, it's not, right? It's not equal to Paul. So it does not enter my if statement. But what it then does is we get this other for loop. This is what we call a nested for loop. And what a nested for loop does is now it starts kind of over. It puts the other for loop on pause. And it says, I can't do anything else until this for loop is complete. So now we've got a new variable called J. And it's equal to 0, right? And then we're going to say is 0 less than 2? It is. So we enter in. And then now we're going to console log. So I'm going to say CL. So our first console log. I is still 0. Console log J, which is 0. I'm going to put a comma here, but it would have been something different. I'm just going to put a comma for space sake. But it'll be up and down and we'll see it here in a second. It's going to console log J, which is 0. Then we do J++. J becomes 1. Is 1 less than 2? It is. So we're going to console log 1. J++. J becomes 2. Is 2 less than 2? No. So it breaks out of this for loop and we get here, but we're not done with this for loop. So we come back up. And now I becomes 1. I becomes 1. So then we start again. And we say, okay, is 1 less than 4? It is. Cool. So we are still within our for loop. That's not broken yet. We say if my array of 1 equals Paul, it is, right? Paul is 1. So then we're going to say, I'm going to put BTA for best TA ever. Or BTE, sorry. So it's going to console log this because that condition was true. Then we get to this for loop and look, it declares, we're declaring another for loop. Or it reads it as a for loop being declared, right? So J is reassigned to 0. Is 0 less than 2? It is. We enter in, we console log 0. J becomes 1. It's 1 less than 2. It is. We console log 1. J becomes 2. Is 2 less than 2? No, it's not. So then we are done with this for loop. We get here. We're not done. So we increment up again. Now I becomes 2. We go and we check. And we say, and you can see this is nice that the computer does all this wicked fast, right? It would take us forever. It would take me forever. I guess it won't speak for you. Checks is my array of 2, index position 2, Paul. No, it's not. Okay, it doesn't do this. We have a for loop. We are declaring that J is 0. We're defining that. J goes back to 0. And you guys can see the pattern. Then it console logs J, which is 0. J plus plus. So it goes up to 1. The console logs 1. J plus plus goes to 2. It's not there. So then it increments back up. I becomes 3. And we keep doing that, right? And so one thing to note when you're dealing with for loops, and we do that until, so we would have another 0 and 1 because we go through the J for loop one more time. And then we get to a point where finally this for loop is broken. And then we can leave and go to line 29 or 30. But this is everything we're going to get. A nested for loop is something you can do. It's a common thing. But you can see even if we have, let's say that there was 100 things in here and 1,000 things in here. I mean, for everything, we're doing it 1,000 times. So it's 100,000 steps that we're doing, right? So a nested for loop can be a little bit slow. And so that's just a common thing to know. It's okay. Like it, again, as you guys are learning, brute force it, make it work. Right? Make it, just figure out how to make it work. And then you refine from there and make it a little bit more efficient. Okay. Any questions before I delete this and we run it? Any questions on this? Cool. So let me clear that. Let's run it real fast and we'll see. So we have the 0 and 1 from our first J. Then I becomes 1. We get the best TA ever. And then we have 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1 because of this for loop here. Cool. And obviously, not to, break your brains. Could I have an if statement within here? Absolutely. Right? You could have triple for loops if you wanted. You could have quadruple. Like it doesn't. You can keep going. It'll just be super slow. But I just wanted to kind of show you guys that there's some flexibility there. Are there any questions? So Robert asked about, there's 2 keywords called break and continue. And so if we say break, if it gets to break, like this would be a better way to do it. If our for loop sees the keyword of break, it'll just exit and it won't run anymore. Like basically we found the condition that we wanted, right? We wanted to see if Paul was in there and then best TA ever. We know that there's not going to be another Paul. So we don't need to do the other ones. I could just use break. So we would still get 0, 1 because whenever it was on Will and Paul wasn't there and it's still console log both J's. And then we got to here, and then once it sees break, it just exit this for loop, the parent for loop here. Yep, Said, I was just about to talk about even numbers. There's another one called continue that basically, like if we run this, it'll just, if there's like, so for example, when we ran it the first time, right after the best TA ever, we still ran this for loop. If we say continue, we say forget the rest of this and go to the next iteration. So you see here how we had 0, 1, that was for Will, this J for loop. Then we have best TA ever, 0, 1, that one's for Paul, Gray, and then Elena. Because it hit a continue, we have one less because it didn't run the for loop when it first read continue. It just didn't run anything else with that. And then it goes up. And then it goes I plus plus equals 2. And then we keep going. But those are 2 ones that you can do. Break's a good one, especially if you're like testing something. If you're testing something and you don't want to like iterate through, let's say this had 100 names. You just want to test that it goes through Paul and you know Paul is second, then you just say break. And that once it says break, you can just think about that as a keyword to exit the for loop. For loop is done running. So Thomas said break will exit and not run anything nested below. That's correct. Once it says break, this for loop is done. In the same way that, remember how in a conditional, like with the if, once it was true, it just broke and it didn't run anything else. Break does the same thing. What continue does is it says, go ahead and go to the next iteration. Don't run any of the code below. So break fully means that this is done. You're done with that for loop. It exits the parent for loop. What continue does is it says, okay, don't run anything below the word continue, and then just do I++. And so it moves on to the next one.
If they had break in the nested for loop, it would just break that loop, right?
Yes, it is just to your loop itself, because this is technically in our parent for loop. That's why break is ending the entire thing. But just like Paul said, if break was here, then it just would break this one. And then it would come up here, but then it would be reestablished each time.
Quick question. So the continue, it would continue once it finds the best TA, meaning Paul. If it didn't find it yet, it would continue doing the if and the for until it finds what it's requesting right there. Once it finds it, then it continues only with the if. I think that was pretty confusing the way I said it.
So it only hits continue if once it finds this condition, right? Because this is only ran if this is true. So that's first and foremost. The second thing is once our code says continue, let's say I had 100 lines of code and 3 more for loops. For just that specific iteration, when I is, so this might be easier. I've got I is 0. It goes to Will, right? It's going to say is Will Paul? No, it's not. And then it's going to come down to this for loop because it doesn't enter in here. And then it runs this and we get 0, 1 console log, right? Then it comes up, I becomes 1. And then it says, okay, I is 1, it's less than 4, that's good. My array of 1 equals Paul. Yes, that's true. So it gives the best TA ever. Then it hits continue. And instead of going down and running this for loop, it just says, okay, no, I is 2. And then it does things like normal. Goes I is 2, 2 is less than 4, is my array of 2. My array of index 2, Paul. No, it's not. So it doesn't do that. Then it gets down to this for loop and runs it. And we get a 0, 1, goes to 3. Does the same thing. That's not it. We come to this for loop and then we get a 0 and a 1. So continue, the only thing that it would do in this instance is prevent us from running the for loop when I is 1, because it just makes I 2 faster. Does that make more sense, Lucas? And this is not, continue and break is not something that's not going to be on your exam or anything like that. That's just somebody asked about it. So I said it. It's a little bit more out of scope than what you need.
Okay, yeah, I think I'll probably have to watch when you taught it again, just a couple more times so I can fully get it.
Yeah, it's something like I would really encourage you guys to continue and break and JS for loop. Like W3 Schools has a great thing. Here, I'll send this to as well. This is in chat now. That you guys can walk through and it will kind of show you some more examples and make sure you guys are sort of reading in on that as well. Again, not something you need to know. As long as you can do a for loop, you're a-okay. As long as you can do a my array dot length, you're a-okay. Okay. Are there any questions on for loops on the T brackets? Anything you guys need or not understanding on this? Oh, even in odds. Yeah. So the last thing I want you to note is, thank you, Josh, for reminding me there's this idea, or not this idea, but this is called a modulo. Modulo. I don't remember how to spell it, if it has an S or not.
Yeah, that was right.
Ah, modulo. And what it is it is the percent sign. Now, you're like, what the heck? That doesn't make any sense. What it does is it allows me to get a remainder. So let's say that I say let X equal 4 modulo 2. Am I off, Paul? Is there a double?
No, it should be one. Wait, let me see. Let me see.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I don't, yeah, that should be good.
let's run this. Let me just make sure I'm running. Okay, yeah, perfect. Huh, I was so stressed. Okay. So what the modulo is it is a percent sign. And what it does is it takes in two things. Whatever is on the left and whatever is on the right. And what it will do is it will take whatever's on the right and put it into whatever's on the left. And the outcome of it is whatever the remainder is. So that kind of sounds confusing. So let's say 11, not 411, and 3. 3 goes into 11 how many times? 3 times, right? 3 times 3 is 9. It feels like there's a lot more math, but there's not, right? So 3 times 3 is 9, or 3 times 3 is 9. And so we go 9 goes into 11 evenly, but we can't do another time, right? We can't do 3 times 4 is 12. So we've got a remainder of 2. So a lot of people in chat are saying that. We'd have a remainder of 2. 3 goes into 11 3 times evenly, and then we just have a remainder of 2. And so if I were to console log X, I get 2. Now, we can use that. We can use modulo for anything. There's a really popular question called FizzBuzz that you'll use the same idea to. But one thing to note is if I do just a really kind of quick trick is if I want to tell if something is even or odds, I just have to do modulo 2 and it will tell me if it's even or odd. Because 2 modulo 11 means that there's going to be one remainder, right? But 12 is 0 remainders, right? 2 goes into anything even an even amount of times, right? You're always going to get 0. And anything that is odd, you're always going to get a remainder of 1. So if I wanted to know if to see if X is even or odd, I say let X equals 987. What could I do here? Based off what we learned today, what could I do here?
The percent sign and then 2.
Percent sign 2, but I will need to do a little bit more, right? I'm telling my computer, hey, I want to check and I want to console log if it's even or odd.
So if
Yep.
modulo 2,
Modulo 2.
No, if X equals modulo 2. Or
X
something.
equals modulo 2. You're on the right track, Josh.
X mod.
What if I did, yeah, what if I did if X modulo 2? We know X is 987 equals 0. Then I console.log even. Else. Odd. So what we're saying is whatever X is, we're gonna do modulo 2 and it's going to give me a value. In this case, it's gonna give me a remainder of 1, right? Because 987 is odd. And we can just use our conditional to say, hey, if that remainder is 0, then we know, let's pretend we didn't know what X was. Then we know that this number is even, so I can console log even. Else, meaning it's not 0, which it's either 0 or 1. Else, console log odd. So this is a way that you could find out if it's even or odd by using this modulo. Now it's not just, that's why I always try to tell you about the remainders. It's not just for evens or odds, but it's a way that you can do it. Okay, any questions here? Any questions with this even or odd, this modulo idea?
Just a quick one for me. Can't you do like we did with 11, put like let X equals 987 percent sign 2 and it'll give you 1 or 0? And then you'll be able to tell that way, or you want it to say even or odd?
So what if, so we would be able to, like, if I did 987 modulo 2, that's gonna give me, yeah, that's gonna give me the remainder of 1, right? And so then I could say if that's the case, but what if, and this is just a thing to start thinking through when we're building code is, if I do it that way, then this is strictly tied to 987. What if I have multiple users that are wanting to bring in multiple numbers and just saying, hey, is my number even or odd? Right? It sounds kind of simple, but if they wanted to input a number, and so I don't know which one it is, you know, X could become whatever the input is. And this function will work no matter what my user gives me. It's not just tied to 987. It is either whatever it's given. If it was the number 12, it was the number 1 million. If it's number 11, doesn't matter because this will work for any number. So it's dynamic there.
So it's the same thing as length. Since X
Kinda.
can change,
Mhm.
it'll
Exactly.
pull up whatever value X changes
Mhm.
to.
Exactly. We want to
Okay.
start thinking through our code again, make sure it works first off, right? That's brute forcing, figuring out things. But then we want to make sure our code is reusable, right? We're not hard coding and saying, okay, 987, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now I know it. Therefore, you know, I can create that. We want to start making sure exactly like what you said. If the array size change, we're kind of making our code to it. It doesn't matter if it changes or whatever it does. We're good to go. Same sort of thing here. Great, great call out. Any other questions on this? Yeah, exactly, Thomas. It's always better to have dynamic code. Okay, any more questions? Okay. Well, then that's all I have for tonight. I will send you, just as a reminder, I'll be sending you out a code tomorrow. For this, I'll send you a whole bunch of like my strategies. I love to listen to music while I code. So I'll send you some of my favorites. Don't stress about it, but I would encourage you to take some time this weekend because you only have 5 hours. Make sure you have a segment of time. Maybe you aren't at the point where you can take a total of 5 hours, but try to get at least, 3 or 4 and tell your friends, tell your family, like, hey, I gotta knock this out. I'd really encourage you to do that or else it gets pretty stressful because you still have assignments next week. You still got other stuff, so I don't want you to kind of start panicking. And we're talking about functions next week. Yeah, we're going to talk all about functions, and then maybe while loops. I think you guys will read about while loops. We're going to talk about functions for sure next week. And then the last exam or the last lecture will be sort of like a career services introduction, like what to expect in web fundamentals, et cetera, et cetera. So just a reminder, everything's due Wednesday. Your discussion questions are due this Sunday. And please, please, please try your exam. Please try your exam this weekend. Again, you have 3 chances, up to 3 chances by Wednesday. So and that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. You should be very proud. Look back. Here's my one thing. You guys just started. Look back at what you knew before this week and what you know now. And I'm sure, unless you came in with like a lot of experience, it's exponentially more. You should be very proud of that. This is hard. You are doing it. You are doing it. So when it gets tough, and I do this, guys, I've been doing it for more than 3 years now. And if I feel stressful, if I feel stressed or like, I don't know what I'm doing, I look back and I'm like, wow, only 3 years ago, I couldn't even zip a file. So you should be very proud. Please take that moment. Please take some time this weekend to celebrate yourself before the exam or after, your choice. Celebrate yourself because you took a big step and you completed your first week, and that is incredible. So you should be very, very proud. And in the moment, if there is a moment you're like, I just don't get it, look at how much you know compared to what you knew a week ago today from when we had orientation. So other than that, you guys have been doing incredible. Great job. Keep it up. If you need anything, feel free to let Paul and I know. Other than that, have a wonderful weekend, my friend.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care, guys.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, you as well.